Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Vilnius for the first ever Rebuilding Ukraine conference in Lithuania. We're all rooting for Ukraine's victory in the war against Russia and hope that the aggressor will be stopped soon. When the structure and economy. How we'll do this and what Lithuania can do to help will be discussed with our guests from Kiev and Brussels. Our conference is live streamed online in Lithuania and Ukraine. Some participants will also join us remotely. Interpretation services into Lithuanian, English, and Ukrainian are available for everyone in the room. Our conference will consist of 3 panel discussions. One, strengthening Ukraine's economy, on rebuilding Ukraine's essential infrastructure, and on financing reconstruction. Before we start the first part of the conference, I would like to welcome our 3 guests. Ingrida Šimonytė, Prime Minister of the Republic of Lithuania, Yulia Svyrydenko, as I know, Yulia Svyrydenko is participating in our conference not just remotely, but also indirectly. And Aušrinė Armonaitė, Minister of Economy and Innovation of the Republic of Lithuania. So let me first invite Ingrida Šimonytė to give a welcome speech.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, mieli kolegos, draugi. Russia's war against Ukraine has been ongoing for over 8 years. Yet on the 24th of February, when Russia launched an open, full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the world woke up to a new reality. Our generation has never imagined that we would witness such brutality of Russia's war crimes and crimes against humanity, its acts of terrorism committed on the soil of an independent and sovereign Ukraine are nothing less than a genocide of Ukrainian nation and are beyond humanly comprehensible. Russian bombs have been raining on residential blocks, kindergartens, hospitals, human shelters in Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Mariupol, and countless other places across Ukraine. Entire districts and towns are being flattened to earth. Amid all this madness and unbearable, senseless pain, however, there was no luxury to be overwhelmed by the immediate state of shock and despair for too long. Incredible resolve to hold on and met Russian army with a much stronger resistance than the Kremlin could have imagined. The whole civilized world united too in support of Ukraine. The Lithuanian government, municipalities, businesses, NGOs, and our people have been donating aid, volunteering, and welcoming war refugees from Ukraine to our country and their own homes. Our military, humanitarian, and financial aid to Ukraine will continue until Ukraine wins this war. And I hope it will help Ukraine to achieve the victory faster, because here in Lithuania, we feel your pain and celebrate your victories as the whole world could see what they look like when horrific images of atrocities by Russian troops in Bucha were published. In early April, I saw it with my own eyes, seemingly endless rows of roofless houses with shattered windows in the villages surrounding Kyiv. I walked amid the apocalyptic ruins of Borodyanka. However, what could have become a ghost town was nothing like that. I also saw dozens of volunteers and emergency servicemen and servicewomen cleaning rubbles brick by brick to bring the town back to life as soon as possible. Rebuilding Ukraine is not a task to be left until reclaimed from the enemy. As the Ukrainian people are coming back home from their shelters and temporary refuge in Ukraine and abroad, the Ukrainian lands must be and are being demined, water and energy supply restored, at least major roads, bridges, and railway connections rebuilt, kindergartens, schools, and hospitals able to function, and housing facilities repaired to have at least roofs and windows before the winter comes. This is a challenge no country, let alone still at war, could or should handle alone. So just like we are doing our utmost to help Ukraine withstand the Russian aggression and win this war, we should and term and immediately. Last week at Ukraine Recovery Conference in Lugano, the government of Ukraine has presented their plan on how to recover the Ukrainian economy and rebuild a truly European, stronger, greener, socially inclusive, and prosperous Ukraine. We also agreed on the main principles that will guide the recovery process, such as full transparency and accountability, strong focus on reforms, especially those that would bring Ukraine closer to the EU membership, Ukraine's lead in the recovery process, and significant coordinated engagement of international partners, as well as stakeholders inside Ukraine, including municipalities, businesses, NGOs, and academia. Efforts to rebuild Ukraine, both after the victory and right now. Lithuania has already announced that we will expand our expert assistance to Ukraine on its European integration reforms that are strongly intertwined with the recovery of Ukraine and will bring lasting positive effects. Last week, Lithuanian government also named that Lithuania will transfer an additional 10 million euros to the National Bank of Ukraine for emergency rebuilding needs. These funds will reach Ukraine in a matter of weeks. But this is far from enough. I believe that today's conference that brought together the major stakeholders from Ukraine, Lithuania, and the EU will help to generate concrete ideas on how the Lithuanian government, municipalities, businesses, and society can best help Ukraine rebuild. Ideas that can and should be turned into very practical actions without delay. Therefore, I thank the Ministry of the Economy and Innovation of Lithuania for organizing this timely event, and all the panelists and audience for joining us today in person or online. I wish you fruitful discussions, useful networking, lasting new contacts, and many good ideas to implement together. Lithuania will support Ukraine until your victory and ours and beyond. Slava Ukraini. Thanks a lot.
To the recorded speech of Ms. Svyrydenko.
Your Excellency, Madam Prime Minister, Your Excellency, Madam Minister, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Lithuanian friends. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for the invitation to the great event and also to apologize for not being able to present in person in Vilnius. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you today on behalf of the Ukrainian government and on behalf of the entire Ukrainian people, who will always remember your sincerity and willingness to support in the most difficult time for our country. You were among the first to come to Ukraine's aid, and you remain among those who care about the peace and security of Europe the most. Lithuania recognized the actions of the Russian Federation in Ukraine grateful for the real help that were received and continue to receive in matters of defense of our state, financial and humanitarian assistance. For the support of our citizens who were forced to leave the country and are currently in Lithuania. Unanimous and comprehensive support of the Parliament of Lithuania in Ukraine's willingness for full membership in the European Union will contribute to the promotion of joint projects in various sectors of the economy, attracting investments and technical assistance. This is very important for rebuilding Ukraine's economy at the critical moment, as well as for strengthening the country's stability in long term. And when peace finally comes, it will definitely be very soon. We invite you, society, invite your companies, your state to join the projects of quick and demonstrative restoration.
Now let us listen to our host, Aušrinė Armonaitė. Please, I give you the floor.
Good morning. Labas rytas. Dobra utro. Colleagues, friends, all of the people that are watching us online. Well, first of all, let me tell you how inspired are we by the Ukrainian people, our brothers and sisters that every day defend every inch of their homeland. And us, Lithuanians, we understand very well how important it is to increase sanctions on the aggressor, how important it is to facilitate and help Ukraine in their journey to the European Union. But the Ukrainian economy also needs help. Ukrainian budget revenues have decreased by 60%. Half of the businesses reduced or suspended their activities. Damage for transport and logistics infrastructure, schools, hospitals, public and private buildings cost hundreds of millions of euros, and it increases every day. So Ukraine needs economic assistance, not only military support. With the beautiful Lithuanian summer. Hopefully it will get better, and also the war will end sooner. Lithuanian businesses have never left Ukraine. Actually, they are coming back faster. They are opening up new shopping malls and shopping centers. I see Mr. Karalis is here as well. They are hiring new people, and the Lithuanian government and people will always be there for Ukraine. So let's discuss today how we are going to rebuild the beautiful country of Ukraine and how we are going to rebuild a vibrant economy of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
We have 3 minutes pause. Ladies and gentlemen, I beg your pardon for the unplanned pause. We are facing some technical problems. I hope these problems are going to be one or 2 minutes. So I hope that the problems are solved. So let me invite our guests to the scene. Please take your seats. As far as I know, there are more guests with us.
Хорошо.
Donors play in this process. Is it possible to predict how long it will take for the Ukraine economy to return to pre-war levels? And let me introduce our speakers. It's Aušrinė Armonaitė, who has already joined our discussion, Taras Kachka, Deputy Minister of Economy of Ukraine. He is with us remotely. Vadim Denisenko, the Executive Director of the Ukraine Institute of the Future. He is also online with us. Andrius Anatoly Fedoruk, Mayor of Bucha, also online. Oleksandr Alekseychuk, member of the Committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on State Building, Local Governance, Regional and Urban Development. He's a chairman of the subcommittee on building materials. And Galina Erko, a member of the Kyiv Oblast Council. I would like to emphasize that every participant is given only 3 minutes to speak on the before-mentioned topics. And I really hope that I don't have to ring bells every time those minutes are up. After we have come full circle, so Ms. Armonaitė, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Slava Ukraina. First of all, when we speak about rebuilding Ukraine, probably we have to understand that there are two phases of that. First of all, and probably that is most important right now, is emergency rebuilding. And I know that in Europe, not everyone agrees on that. Many people say that, okay, let's wait for the ceasefire, let's wait for the peace, and then let's, start rebuilding Ukraine. I strongly disagree with that, and I think that the audience, and well, here in Lithuania, we should important for everyone. So when it comes to emergency rebuilding, of course, we have to plan how we are going to rebuild railroad and also transport infrastructure. That is very important for schools, public buildings. And here in this audience, I know that there are people who are already planning their involvement. There are Lithuanian businesses, construction businesses that are already involved in these processes. So here in the government in Lithuania, we are discussing whether it is possible for us to set up a fund previously the European beforehand European money is coming, because as we know, Ursula von der Leyen, she just announced not so long ago that 9 billion euros will be dedicated this year, not only for the humanitarian aid, but also for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And we know in Lithuania, so we think that this process has to be started earlier, and we in Lithuania want to play a proactive role. Maybe a bit more on the second phase, which is probably more complicated, and it will take time. It's the reforms of Ukraine. Not only anti-corruption or better regulation and better governance, but also human rights reforms. And I'm very happy, actually, and I'm very impressed and inspired that Ukraine is not, waiting for it to join the EU, to join the Western family institutionally. The government and also the parliament already take steps. For instance, Istanbul Convention and ratification of that is one of the examples. It is a long-term reform, but these decisions are being made now. So 2 phases, emergency reconstruction and long-term reforms, but both of them has to be started. We have to be started now.
Thank you very much. Now I invite Taras Kachka to speak at our panel.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation, and I here just to represent the ministry, but this is for me personal honor to participate and to talk to you. So even if it is just an occasion due to the unavailability of Yulia Svyrydenko, who just sent her greetings to you. So I think that we have another implication that is important for the recovery of Ukraine, and it is the fact that after the initial shock of this massive aggression of Ukraine, of Russia against Ukraine this February, starting from May this year, our economy started to revive from bottom up, so it's quite stable for several months. Of course, it's by different terms half of the economy of pre-war economy we have in terms of output, in terms of export, in terms of import, and the general decrease of GDP will be on the level of 1/3 of GDP by year, but in March and April this year. So that's why, and during these first weeks of war, we managed together with also Lithuanian companies to ensure that all our key branches of economy are operating quite well, key for the general function of economy, like railway or retail chains or banking systems, telecommunications, etc. So now it seems that any company that works in Ukraine, still operates in Ukraine, has this opportunity to operate in Ukraine in the environment that as close to normal as possible if we are not Russia shells our cities throughout the nation, and this is
Sorry, Mr. Kachka, we cannot hear you. So
displaced persons.
it's okay.
We see that a lot of Ukrainians actually have strong will to turn back to Ukraine, and with all their gratefulness for the shelter they received in Europe, now they see their future in Ukraine, and that's why for us it is important, as for the government, it is important that economy operates and there are possibilities for work and ensure the recovery and economic support to Ukraine as soon as possible. So even now, so that in addition to the early recovery or emergency recovery of infrastructure in regions like Kyiv region, for example, where we need a lot of small bridges and roads to be rebuilt in order to ensure the normal functioning of the region. On the framework of this recovery, I think that as well we have a common understanding that all our efforts to integrate Ukraine into the European Union and membership in the European Union is, in addition to the great political symbolism of this decision, is also all the instruments that are applied by the European Union for this.
Floor to another speaker. So thank you very much. Now I give floor to Vadim Denisenko.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. And if you speak about the reconstruction of Ukraine, first of all, we have to have an answer for one main question. It's the question of our demographic situation. The first main problem is the changes in the demographic composition of a number of regions of Ukraine. And the first thing which we have to do is the creation of theoretical, maybe mathematical models of how Ukraine would look demographically after the war. We must understand where and how many people will live in these territories. The second problem we need to take is to invent a new specialization for a number of cities and even Ukrainian regions, we named it oblasts. The Soviet economy died even before the war. It began to self-disintegrate around 2013, 2014. In 2022, Soviet economy finally died. Now we need to rethink dozens of cities and towns of Ukraine, including a number of regional centers, oblast centers. Of these regions. At the same time, we must clearly understand that Ukraine has big
So we are still facing technical problems, but
that is in the future of 20, 30 years will die because of big water problems. And the third step, we have to launch a mass educational programs for getting new professions. We can become a pilot's place for these programs. Such large-scale changes have not occurred in any country in the world. And here we must be absolutely open to the latest educational experiments. In all these steps,
now let's listen to Andrius Kubilius from Brussels.
Well,
there is no sound, Mr. Kubilius. We do not hear you. Try once again, please.
yeah, good morning. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes, we do.
It's okay, good. So good morning. Best greetings from Brussels. Very briefly, there is no need to explain how important is so-called Marshall Plan for reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine. I was, initiating Marshall Plan for Ukraine even before the war in 2017. So I learned a lot about, how some problems can arise. Which was published on May 18th, exactly about reconstruction and rebuilding plans for Ukraine. And also there are Ukrainian academicians who developed also their plans. So there are quite good, steps forward. And we need to understand very clearly what the major problems will be on the way, going forward for implementation of this plan, and where Lithuania and other countries, including together with Ukraine, needs to concentrate their attention. First of all, of course, here will be major question of how big are the needs for reconstruction and from where, resources can come. Experts are speaking about the need of 500 billion up to 1 trillion euros value of Marshall Plan. That is big amount of money. Definitely, this is quite a big challenge to find from where those money can come. European Commission, of course, is naming three possible sources. The first one is sanctioned and seized Russian state or private money. Second, grants from donors countries, and the last one, EU special borrowing instrument, similar to what was done with recovery fund for pandemic. And here will be the biggest discussion about this special instrument. because without that instrument, there will be quite a big problem to raise enough of money. But borrowing on EU behalf is quite problematic inside of EU. Second, of course, there will be EU and Americans. Ukrainians want to own the whole project. Europeans are first of all, the management, the national management of the whole Marshall Plan should look how to keep the trust of taxpayers and Ukrainian citizens, in order really to have this the whole big plan successful. And the fourth is, of course, domestic architecture of the management of Marshall Plan in Ukraine, where really, lack of absorption capacity can be a major problem. That is what we have seen back in 2017, and while Lithuanian experience with Invega, with point is really conditionality, which EU is looking forward. Conditionality on using those money in order for to push forward the needed reforms of Ukraine in order for Ukraine to integrate itself into EU, and that also should be very much valued, from when we are talking about the future architecture of Marshall Plan. And I stop here.
Thanks a lot. Anatoly Fedoruk, Mayor of Bucha, is with us online. Please, Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Доброго дня, шановні учасники конференції. Дякую за запрошення і взагалі за таку можливість вести дискусію. 4 липня 2022
of rebuilding of Ukraine that is scheduled for the upcoming 10 years. And it was named Ukraine the magnet for the international investments. Until February 24th, Ukrainian community was rapidly developing. Of course, we had our particularities. But together with that, I want to say that our decentralization reforms were successful. 53,000 people were affected by those reforms in my jurisdiction directly. And the budget of development was 500 million, and the total budget was way more than a billion hryvnias. But of mention that decline of such cities like Bucha and any other city that was actually occupied by Russia. They have a 50% miss in terms of GDP, of the local GDP. Of course, the structure is ruined that was giving us workplaces. For example, Antonov plane construction bureau. From the day one, Russians were attacking this airplane field. The structure of businesses, logistics is destroyed, and is the victory, a victory against our enemy. But of course, we also need to be thinking about the rebuilding and renewing our cities, our territorial groups, so they can come back, so people can come back in the cities and restart the operations there. Alongside with the governmental agenda that was presented in Lugano, we also have our own program in Ukraine that is aiming to build new residential housing for people that lost their homes due to war, the internal refugees, people that are actually that left and that are now coming back, and they to help our people, help our city, and make sure that our life flows well. Of course, I don't have enough time, and I really want to stop on one particular ambitious project that was started back in 2021. It's Bucha Techno Garden, sustainable development. This project was supposed to figure out the problem of employment in the capital and in the cities, so people will not have to migrate from Bucha to nearby Kyiv. As a result of this project, we had in this project, asking various international organizations to join and help us to make it happen, to help us improve the economic situation of the local area. We have to become stronger. So in the future, we can fight honorably if they need be. And finally, I want to say that we have to live today, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but we need to live now, even in the conditions. So it's very important to make connections for us with municipalities of other countries, with European municipalities, that we can, using this interaction, make sure that our people are happy in their hometown. And I really want to stress that this cooperation exists. We have a great partner in Palanga, which is one of the cities in Lithuania, and we're happy that that municipality helps us a lot to figure out the crisis with people that had to leave the city. Representatives of the Ukrainian community, we have to be particular in regard of financial help. So, for example, in Bucha, there was a decision to ease the taxation and don't make people pay the utilities bills, but that actually also hurts our budget. So those reforms can be both good and hurtful.
Now Mr. Oleksiychuk is going to share his insights with us.
Labas dienas. I am very glad to be here today. I am grateful for the invitation of this conference. My English is still not very good. I will speak Ukrainian if do you not mind.
Had a terrible war, one of the worst wars we had in the last 1,000 years. But we're sure that we're going to win. We know that we have strength, we have friends like Lithuanian Republic, which from the first day was helping Ukraine. Rebuilding of Ukraine is extremely important, as my colleagues were mentioning, not after we win, but now.
Допомога фінансова в частині відбудови, але Україна, в свою чергу, теж готова дати свої можливості для інших країн, для бізнесу інших країн стосовно інвестицій. Своїми ресурсами, як людськими, так і природними ресурсами, аби дати можливість бізнесу європейському створювати умови для праці в Україні, заробляти кошти, при цьому лишати податки
and leave their taxes
в
in
Україні,
Ukraine.
і в тому числі за рахунок цих податків відбудовувати нашу країну.
And
Ми сьогодні
including the
маємо
funds from those taxes,
величезну
we
кількість
will be able
зруйнованих
to
шкіл,
rebuild our
величезну
country.
кількість
We have
зруйнованих
huge
лікарень,
amount of
величезну
schools
кількість
destroyed,
взагалі
hospitals destroyed.
зруйнованої інфраструктури.
A lot of
Я
infrastructure
думаю,
is
ми
non-operational anymore.
спільно
So I
зможемо
think that together
відбудувати і
we will be
подолати,
able
ще раз
to
наголошую. Ми не лише просимо,
build it
ми
back up.
готовимо дати
We are not
можливості,
only
дати
asking,
умови
but we are
для
also
вашого
willing to
бізнесу
give the
працювати
opportunity
в
for your
Україні.
business to work in
Саме
Ukraine.
тому парламент України,
That's why,
Верховна Рада, яку я
Ukrainian
представляю, сьогодні приймає
Today
закони, які
Are taking the
пом'якшують інвестиційний клімат, які
the laws that
сьогодні
would help with the
створюють
investment
умови і
climate.
створюють в тому числі захист і дають розуміння,
that are creating
де нам потрібна
laws
відбудова,
for defense of the
а
business.
де ми можемо
So we can
гарантувати
understand
безпеку
where exactly
і
we need
гарантувати
that rebuilding,
гарний,
and we want to see
швидкий,
where exactly we can
інвестиційний, зручний
create
клімат
easy
для
climate
бізнесу і
for
для країн
businesses, for
Європейського
investments
Союзу, які
from the countries of
прийдуть
European
до нас
Union
в Україну.
that are going to come to us.
Сьогодні ми маємо хорошу комунікацію, в тому
We have very
числі
good
з
communication
колегами
with
з
the
Литовського
colleagues
Сейму,
from Lithuanian Sejm,
зокрема з економічним комітетом вашого Сейму.
especially with the Economic
Про
Committee of
можливості
your
ваших
Sejm.
портів.
What
І це
logistics is
взаємовигідно
a very
нашим
sharp
країнам,
question at the moment.
тому що продовольча криза, яка сьогодні утворилася в світі
Humanitarian crisis that might
війни,
occur
внаслідок
due to a
заблокованих
war, the grain crisis,
на півдні України портів,
as a result of
потребують
the
відвантаження.
ports that are
Особливо ми
blocked.
розуміємо, що
The-
за тиждень
we need to send the
починається
goods somehow. We need
збір
to
нових
send the
врожаїв,
grain,
і знову ж таки
and,
зерно, яке планувалося
the grain that was
потрапить на світовий ринок,
planned
виявляється заблокованим
to be in
і
the
лежить
world
в Україні.
market
Тому ця логістика, як
is
автомобільним
obviously
транспортом,
not there. There
так
is
і
no possibility to
залізничним,
develop that,
надзвичайно важлива.
to
Ми
deliver that.
розуміємо, що є труднощі,
We understand
оскільки
that there are
між
issues,
Україною і Литвою є
because
інфраструктури Олександр
and
Кубраков.
Minister of our
Сьогодні
infrastructure
його
Oleksandr
заступник
Kubrakovas.
Мустафа Наєм буде у нас на
Today,
івенті.
Mustafa Nayyem, his
Сьогодні
deputy,
намагаються
will be
вирішити
here.
цю проблему,
They're trying to solve
аби
this
якомога швидше відновити ці
to
ланцюжки
renew
логістичні,
logistical
щоб можна
connections as
було
soon as possible.
якомога більше вантажів, якомога швидше
To make sure
доставити
that,
до Литви, до литовських
as many
портів.
loads of grain
Так
can
само
be
ми
delivered to
говоримо про те,
Lithuanian ports.
що Україна багата деревиною.
Ukraine
Проте ми
is
говоримо
rich in
про те,
terms of wood as
що
well.
ми готові ділитися на європейській
So we are ready
деревиною, але
to
водночас
share
ми
this wood with
запрошуємо
European market.
ваші, в тому числі
But we are
компанії,
also asking
приходити в
your companies
Україну
to come
і робити виробництво з деревини в нас в Україні.
and
Сьогодні потребує, як я вже говорив на початку,
job
не
places,
лише
jobs for
гроші живі
Ukrainians.
на відбудову,
Not only we need
допомога і
financial
інвестування
help, but
в
also we
Україну,
need the
тому
investments
що
because
це і
that's gonna
наша
create
відбудова,
benefit for
і це ваша вигода в тому числі.
humans.
Тому я думаю, що
residing
сьогодні
in
ми
Ukraine.
почуємо і гарні запитання. Сьогодні ми
So I'm sure that today we're
почуємо
gonna
хороші
hear
ідеї,
many more
які
great questions.
спільно зможемо втілити в Україні
ideas
і спільно Україна і Литва.
that
Дякую.
we'll be able to make into reality.
Now I'm asking
Ukraine
Governor
and
to
Lithuania.
speak on the subject we are discussing.
So
Я дуже рада бути сьогодні тут.
I'm super happy to be here
Київський регіон.
to represent Kyiv
Дякую
region.
за запрошення і дякую за
Thank
ті
you for
прапори,
inviting me.
які
Thank you for the banners that are hanging right
усім
now
містом. І я
in forepost of defense of democracy and European values. And this forepost is built
життя кожного українця, і життя
from
кожної
each little brick
дитини, яка загинула на війні.
that from each death, soldier, man, woman, child that died at war.
Складаються з ваших рішень, з наших
And
рішень.
now it's your decisions, our decisions, and everything what we do right now.
Справа в тому, що дана конференція
This conference is not only words.
це реально той самий камінчик того
It's one of
форпоста,
those
який
bricks
зможе
of that forepost that is going to be able to defend us and the entire Europe from aggression. So, thank you
Що
so
я
much.
можу сказати?
What can I say?
На сьогодні
Today,
кожен день війни
Each day of
наближає
war
глобальні ризики для усієї
brings
Європи і
the
для
risks
України.
closer and closer for Ukraine and for European Union as well. Talking specifically about the region that I'm representing, I'm from Borodenka. I know from the inside out the situations and what's been happening there, and I can speak as a representative of Kievan region very well for all the ruined cities, for all the people that were wronged by Russian aggression. So we need to decide with you. We need to stop on the next moment. At this point, of course, the development and rebuilding of Ukrainian economy is very important for us, and we indeed have something to offer
розміщення саме на нашій території. Адже
on our territory.
ми привабливий інвестиційний регіон.
We are attractive region.
Прекрасних людей, які
We have great people
працювати і здатні
that are capable to work hard and well,
прекрасний продукт.
that are able to create good
Наступний
products.
момент ми говоримо
Talking about the development of medicine
дійсно
that
може бути імплементована
is
саме
strong
на нашій
and can be
території.
even stronger and can be
Але ми
implemented
маємо
here.
говорити
We also want to say
день і про освіту.
a little bit about
Адже
the
діти, які
education
лишилися
as
в
well,
Україні, вони
because the
мають
kids that are left in
не
Ukraine,
просто бачити і
they,
відчувати Європу,
they-
вони мають виховуватися в
not
європейській
only they have to see the Europe, right? They have to be raised up in the European values. How many buildings of administration are destroyed, schools, kindergartens. If I can briefly stand aside from the topic, today we have Mr. Kargulis, the one who is taking care of Ukraine every day. He has been in
від самого початку
and he has been helping from the very beginning.
зрозумів суть наша
He
серце і
understood
запропонував
us from the
наступний
very beginning. He
варіант.
understood our
Знаєте,
heart,
дуже
and he
приємно,
offered the
що,
following thing to us.
народився такий проект про
It's very nice to understand that there was a project
яка була зруйнована рашистами. Я вірю,
from the rebuilding of the school in Kievan region, the one that was destroyed during the war.
консолідації зусиль кожного
Due to consolidation of the efforts,
відроджувати об'єкт за
it
об'єктом.
will be possible to renew one object
Вірю,
after the other.
що лише
I
консолідувавши
believe that
зусиль
only by
заради
consolidating
вирішення
our
конкретних
efforts
задач, якщо у нас буде єдина
to
мета і
decide concrete
етапність
tasks
відродження,
and goals
ми
that we
зможемо
have in our
зробити це
living in the future. We're living right now, and right now we have a
зараз
problem,
у нас є
and we
питання.
have a question,
І зараз ми потребуємо уваги і
and we need an
потребуємо
answer.
цього відродження. Скоро вересень.
And we're looking forward to this rebuilding. Soon there's going to be September. Kids will have to go to school. Soon we'll have winter, and we all need to survive that winter.
Я впевнена, що в такому ключі
I'm
ми
sure that
зможемо випрацювати правильну
In this line, we'll be
стратегію
able to
і
create the
швидку
right strategy,
стратегію
the
нашої
fast
взаємодії.
strategy
Тому
of
що
our
так
interaction,
саме чинить європейське
because
суспільство.
that's how European
А
Union
ми
operates.
готові
And
відстоювати
we're ready to
це на своїх кордонах,
fight
ціною
for it,
людських життів.
paying the price of our lives.
Я хочу, аби
I
зараз
want to
ми що
who died.
ми зможемо дати як
And
можна швидше.
I'm sure that we're going to be able to fight back as soon as we can.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have 10 minutes left for your closing remarks. So I propose that we do another round with every one of you having only 1 minute to speak up. So please, Aušrinė.
Maybe three final points. I think there are so much homework for us to do. First of all, for the Ministries of Economy and Innovation team, it is important to find the right frameworks for to help our businesses help Ukraine. With our businesses, and I hope we'll be able to provide them soon. Second, of course, Ukrainians know their needs best. We have Mayor of Bucha here. We have connections with other regional mayors. And I'm very happy that there are municipalities in Lithuania, for instance, Vilnius municipality or Palanga municipality, that are already in partnership with the regional municipalities in Ukraine. And in this audience, I see there are more mayors. And I encourage our regional teams, not only from the central government, but also from the regional teams from Lithuania, to stay in contact with colleagues and friends in Ukraine. Schools, any other facilities, even transport. It has to be rebuilt in a better way, keeping in mind the green and digital transition, which is not only the future of Europe and Ukraine, but also the present of Europe and Ukraine. Railway and gauge that my colleague from the Parliament of Ukraine just mentioned, yes, I'll stop very quickly. It is important not only to rebuild it, but also to integrate it to the European railway network. Let's extend Rail Baltica to Ukraine. And so there are so many things we have to do right now.
Much. I ask everybody, please be so kind to fit in 1 minute. So, Mr. Kash.
Agree with she highlighted, and we already work on these priorities, and we wish to continue to implement these ideas into practice. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Denisenko.
Very shortly, I think that everybody understands that weak Ukraine is the biggest challenge for the security for the Europe in the future. Because if we'll stop this war, after the next day of shaking hands or signing something, Putin or somebody else in Russia will start to prepare. Can stand up against Russia.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kubilius.
Well, I would urge both sides, Lithuanian government authorities and Ukrainian authorities, not to concentrate only on bilateral relations. For time being, there is a very big need to fight on European level for establishment of proper Marshall Plan, both of its international management architecture, but also, first of all, in finding the best ways how to finance, the Marshall Plan, which it's really very huge needs, up to 1 trillion euros. So such problems like how to seize to European borrowing, instruments, those to have this Marshall Plan working in a very well developed architecture, and also with enough of money to be spent on reconstruction and modernization of Ukrainian economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fedoruk.
Шановні колеги, я думаю, ви
Dear colleagues, I hope you will agree that war is always ruins, always casualties. And inviting business community, we absolutely have to. Have to take part of it, and we'll be happy to take investments from Lithuania, from the European community, in the new, renewed settings. We have analyzed the mistakes that we had before, and we're ready to work with you already today. And we want to do it now, not after the great victory. Є декілька речей, які ми маємо розуміти. Ми сильні.
Друга, ми переможемо.
And we have what we're going to do in the United Europe.
Я дякую ще раз за таку нагоду.
I'm very grateful for such an opportunity.
Що дух українця
And
незламний.
you guys know that the spirit of Ukrainian is very strong. Your help to Ukraine will give power to you as well, and you'll be able to make the right moves, constructive moves. We are together, not only in terms of thoughts, but also in actions. And these actions will be realized in the shortest time span possible.
I thank the Minister of Economy, our host, and Minister of Economy. So now we are ready to change the path.
We change the panels. I ask all of you to stay in your seats for another 5 minutes until we check the sound and connection with our Ukrainian speakers. Thank you for patience. I ask everyone to take back your seats. We are slowly starting the session. Please take back your seats. We are starting the session.
Kur yra
And I invite my panel that came here to join me now, here live on the panel. And I start from the Deputy Minister for Economy and Innovation, Jovita Neliupšienė. I also invite Vice President of Lithuanian Confederation of Industrialists, Dalius Gedvilas. And Mr. Aivaras Abramovičius, Chairman of the Board of Agro Region. Soon we will see also of our Ukrainian guests, our Ukrainian panelists. I hope that they will be turned in any minute. While that is happening, let me also introduce the task of our session. And I think the most proper words that were already voiced during the first session that I heard that describes the intent and the task of our session is that the winter is coming. So what are the most imminent needs and demands to rebuild that critical infrastructure, rebuild social infrastructure, critical infrastructure being the roads, energy supplies, electricity supplies, social infrastructure being schools, hospitals that were destroyed, shelled, bombed, now taken back by Ukrainian forces, Slava Ukraini. And what can we do? So first of all, while we are still waiting for our Ukrainian panel to join in, maybe I will introduce slowly who are those people that will join us. First of all, the Deputy Minister for Infrastructure in Ukraine, Mustafa Nayyem. Second Vice Minister, Deputy Minister for Communities and Territories Development, Ivan Lukeria. We also have Mayor of Konotop, Artem Semenichin, who was supposed to join us live here, unfortunately will join us online. And representative of the European Commission, Deputy Director General for Neighborhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations, Mr. Maciej Popovsky. So I guess as we are still, my intention was to start surely from Ukrainian part, and I'm very happy to see already that we can do that. So I invite Mr. Mustafa Nayyem. I will start from you with regards to the most imminent needs from Ukrainian side, from the infrastructure that was destroyed. I think you are the best person to give us the clear picture of what does Ukraine need before the winter comes to allow that infrastructure to be rebuilt. Do we have the Vice Minister? Mr. Mustafa Nayyem, I will start from you with regards to the most imminent needs from Ukrainian side, for the infrastructure that was destroyed. I think you are the best person to give us the clear picture of what does Ukraine need before the winter comes to allow that infrastructure to be rebuilt.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, for having me. First, I would like to convey greetings from the Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine.
Mr. Mustafa Nayyem, I will start from you with regards to the most imminent needs from Ukrainian side, for the infrastructure that was destroyed. I think you are the best person to give us the clear picture of what does Ukraine need before the winter comes to allow that.
First of all, I'm sorry for the sound issues. First of all, I would like to convey greetings from the Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine, Oleksandras Kubrakovas, who is the co-chairman of the Ukrainian-Lithuanian Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic and Scientific Technical Cooperation. Unfortunately, he could not personally attend as he is currently on his way returning from business trip. And also, I would like to thank you for organizing such an important event and for the opportunity to discuss the reconstruction of Ukraine's economy, as well as to express gratitude to the Lithuanian side for the comprehensive support of Ukraine at this time. And due to the military aggression of the Russian Federation against our country, the transport of system of Ukraine suffered a catastrophic blow. Our priority task for today, for this moment, is the restoration of the transport corridors. And you know that we have big problems with the European Union also because of our checkpoints. Search for alternative routes and the creation of infrastructure necessary for the expansion of export opportunities through the western borders. Restoration of railway and road infrastructure and maximal facilitation of the conditions of road transportation. Construction of border checkpoints. This is our immediate needs we actually are working on all these days. Every day we count damages to the transport sector of infrastructure. We understand that it's not final figures we have now, but for today, the total amount of direct documented infrastructure losses has already reached almost $130 billion or 3 trillion euro hryvnias. Of course, again, I'm talking only about direct impact, and we understand the consequences much more. And there are destroyed bridges, roads, railways, as well as civilian airports. In addition, municipal streets of cities, parks of public and municipal transport throughout Ukraine received significant damage. And for understanding what has actually happened for today morning, we had information about 310 bridges on the state roads were destroyed. Almost 25 kilometers of the roads were damaged. 6,500 kilometers of railways were damaged, destroyed, or out of control. And all these issues we are just counting every day. And therefore, there is a need for qualified design and contracting organizations, architectural bureaus, and city architects, as well as volunteers who could participate in the preparation and implementation of infrastructure projects for the restoration of Ukraine, in particular in the railway, sea, river, air transport, and road sectors, including the rebuilding of the cities and towns. We understand that all issues can be done maybe after victory, but Minister of Infrastructure or our team involved in those immediate needs we have now, because this season is very important for us regarding harvest we have, regarding all problems we have on our harbors. And it's also urgent to restore critical transport infrastructure facilities, I mean, main railways and highways, by installing modular, demountable, or pontoon bridges for road transport, at least 30 bridges, 150 meters or 250 meters long, and rail transport, at least 20 bridges. All these bridges are now destroyed or damaged, and we are now trying to do everything to come over this problem. But again, we need these artificial bridges, at least for some times. One of the most important priorities in the country's rebuilding chain is the provision of uninterrupted transport services, both in cities and in interregional traffic. We are interested in equipment that was already in use, but still suitable for the use. I mean, buses, trolleybus, trams, and which can be transferred as a humanitarian aid. We are saying about directly, because many of our cities now out of transportation at all. For example, we are talking about Chernihiv and Kharkiv, they have big problem. And we are not talking only about city transport, but also about interregional, which is connecting different regions of Ukraine. And given that air transportation is suspended and all Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea and Azov seas are forcibly closed to the entry and exit of ships, we are adapting to the new conditions. In particular, we are rebuilding the operation of our logistics system. For this moment, the main volume of traffic is provided by road and rail transport.
Excuse me, sorry, I have to interrupt you because we have a limited time for the session. Just a very short after question. The priorities you outlined, which is roads, railways, and border checkpoints, it is a kind of also a long-term reconstruction. could you just say 1-2 sentences about that immediate assistance or your key priorities for the autumn?
For the autumn, okay, I will tell very simply. Before war, we usually exported kind of 8 million agriculture products from Ukraine. And now 70% of all our transportation was closed because of harbors. So what we need now is to restore all our roads, which goes to the western border. And we are talking about checkpoints and expanding their capability to deliver cargoes. We also need these bridges because it's very important. It's not only about civilians, it's also about business. So we need these bridges immediately, 30 bridges which are now destroyed and we cannot come over these rivers in Ukraine. So this is a big problem. And the third issues which we actually need from our European partners and all our partners around us, of course, it's simplification of all procedures and custom and border service. This is the immediate need we have now. Also, we're talking about railways because railroads, it's one of the most influential infrastructure institution in Ukraine. As you know, that railways actually did a lot to deliver humanitarian aid, but also now it is very important for business. Without these three issues, I mean, roads, checkpoints, and railroads, we will have big problem in the future in this autumn. But also we need this infrastructure, not only in Ukraine, but outside of Ukraine. Because, for example, not in Poland, in Romania, and all other countries, they are not used to have this amount of cargoes, especially agriculture. So they need warehouses. We need logistic and supply chains to the harbors. I mean, Gdynia, Gdansk in Poland, we are talking about Klaipėda, and of course, we are talking about Constanța, because all these ports are not ready for now. We understand that they can be stuck in just in 2-3 months.
Thank you so much. We'll come to agriculture later in the session. Now I turn to Deputy Minister Ivan Lukeria to depict a picture of also basic needs, most imminent needs in the regions, as you are the ministry that has a better view of needs in the municipalities.
Доброго дня, шановні колеги. Радий, що ми беремо участь в обговоренні конференції.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and I'm happy that I was invited here, and I'm happy to speak about the questions of the rapid help to Ukraine to help out. And of course, we have a long-term plan, which is super important for us. We're looking to not only short-term solution, but also long-term, right? And we also need architectures. We need huge investments, especially in the construction. We need building materials. But this is all next step after the victory. As of right now, the whole government of Ukraine and our ministry in particular are focusing on the problems of the current nature, of the survival nature, because we're still in military state. We need to give the base services to the people. We're trying to renew those base services in the deoccupied cities, in the cities that are next to the front line. Jointly with the local authorities, we're trying to help with water infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, all the utilities. Overall, total destructions for the day are more than 39,000 of the objects of the buildings that were totally demolished or partially destroyed. And the total financial loss is more than $95 billion. This is the damage from physical destruction of the schools, kindergarten, roads, and all sorts of social and transport infrastructure. The main priorities and the main issues that we are having right now are supporting people with the base services. For example, if we talk about education, more than 110 educational buildings were destroyed, schools, kindergartens, universities. But of course, it's critical for us to make sure that the educational institutions can function seamlessly, so the kids can go to the school. For that, we need to renew around 600 schools, 300 kindergartens. A key question, of course, as well, is the setup of the bomb shelters in those institutions, because this is going to be one of the very important factors to make sure that the kids are safe at school. Of course, another challenge is the heating season. In many cities that were deoccupied, or the ones that are on the front line right now, more than 300 systems of heating were destroyed, totally or partially. The total repair cost is roughly 1 billion hryvnias. With renewal of the supply to the end users. In the cities like Ochtyrka, Kremenchuk, Mykolaiv, these are huge cities where hundreds of thousands of people are living, and they are in danger of not being able to be receiving the heating since October. So these systems are very important for us to restore. We're also looking into the alternative solutions, sending the heating to the residential buildings. Maybe it's going to be module stations that are mobile and can be moved to different places. We need a few dozens of these stations to make sure that we can react on time for the challenges. And we also need systems of water supply. For example, a city like Mykolaiv or Chernihiv, where hundreds of thousands of people are living, the water supply was destroyed. So we need to restore that system in the cities that were deoccupied. But we also need to supply the model mobile solutions to people that are.
I'm very sorry, but I have to interrupt you because we have to continue the session. We will come back with particular questions. Now I turn to our third representative from Ukraine to get the clearer picture. And until now, we got the picture from the national level, from the ministry. We also have with us the mayor of Konotop, the city for Lithuanian audience the size of similar Šiauliai, Artem Semenichin. Please describe the situation on the ground. So in the city that you are a mayor of, what is being done? What is the situation? What kind of assistance do you need? And maybe what you don't need?
Всім доброго дня. Дуже дякую за запрошення взяти участь в такому дуже важливому форумі.
I'm happy to be a part of this important forum. I want to thank from all people of Konotop that had to be evacuated. A lot of people from Konotop went to Lithuania. We're very happy with the help from Lithuania, the humanitarian help. I want to say in 4 seconds about the city of Konotop. This is very important. This is a sacred city, because in 1659 Konotop was the city where Moscow horde was stopped, and Russians were not able to infiltrate further Ukraine. After that, Hetman Vygovsky destroyed Russian troops, and the occupation of Lithuania became possible. And even right now, Konotop did not give up. Konotop was fighting guerrilla warfare. We had partisans here. As of right now, we're going to the autumn season, right? We need heating systems powered by alternative fuels.
замінити старі
we need to change the old heating systems to the new heating system to make sure that we have the possibility to supply the educational process in our schools, because we understand that most likely the gas, we will not have enough gas to heat all the buildings, because and we will not have enough gas to supply all the educational institutions. So as of right now, we have already lost 1 year of education of our kids. So it's very important for us to make sure that we go back to the normal type of life next year. It's important for us to set new heating systems, at least in the stations that are in charge of large areas in the cities that are heating large areas. We really need help in that regard. Also, we need to find a way to finance those heating systems, at least the ones next to the educational institutions. And also in those educational institutions, we need to build the bomb shelters to make sure the safety. And right now we have a lot of regions of the city, a lot of districts that don't even have the bomb shelters. We are on the border with Moldova, with the Russian Federation. There's 60 kilometers until the border, and our neighboring villages and every day are being shelled. So it's super important for us to make sure that we get the shelters done and we get the heating systems done. This is crucial for us. And of course, another important thing is the water supply. Because as of right now, we already have purchased, partially helping with help of volunteers, generators so they can lift the water up from our reservoirs. But the question number one, the issue number one is heating. And the other question is safety of people. If we can have help in these two directions, heating and safety, we would be really thankful to you. That would help to save our city this winter.
But also quite clear. So I turn now to the Deputy Minister for Economy and Innovation, Jovita Neliupšienė. Is Lithuania ready to help? Ready to help soon? Short term to fill in those short-term needs?
Thank you very much, and really it is very important for us to hear about the concrete needs and about the concrete priorities which are needed right now, because we of course are sure, and where, as our member of parliament was saying, we're really part of the discussion on the EU level and how the future of Ukraine should look like. Now we have to concentrate and mobilize not only ours as Lithuanians, but definitely all the international community, the possibility to support and to help to reply to their needs which were mentioned. First of all, of course, I would say there are probably many more priorities, but I think that we have to look at what are these emergency things we can do before winter comes. First of all, definitely schools and educational buildings, because it's I think that everybody can understand and support, and President Zelensky was mentioning not once that all the kids has to come back to schools, because we don't want to lose another war of lost generation, of loss of young kids' lives. So to come back, so first of all, of course, it's rebuilding or reconstructing, refurbishing schools and kindergartens. This probably will be the thing. Some things have been already done. Vilnius delivered glazing and windows to Borodenka. Many more have to be done. We are working on the project as well in order to how we can actually measure and how we can project what would be the needs of one or another region in Ukraine, where we can actually with the help of our business, business doing and providing the materials, and the government is supporting. So this is really under discussion, and I would say not already under discussion, or one step further under consideration in the government. Another thing is where Lithuania has a lot of, I would say, experience and possibilities, and what we heard definitely is water treatment and water supply. We have to really mobilize and try to understand what kind of the infrastructure can be rebuilt in order to make sure, because UNICEF and other international organizations are indicated that more than 6 million of people are actually right now not without the heating but without the water. This is really probably not a possible thing. Another thing which was mentioned by the Ministry of Infrastructure, and I do believe this is the interest not only of Ukraine to export goods, but our interest, because Ukraine was part of European supply chains and still is of European supply chains. So it's in our core interest actually to help Ukraine to rebuild the infrastructure, be it a railway or be it roads or be it bridges. I do believe that Lithuanian railway company, which is state-owned enterprises, actually has a huge potential in helping Ukraine, for example, to refurbish locomotives, which is important to deliver the transport. But on top of that, of course, to work on what kind of the rail connections, interconnections can be rebuilt right now, which are the mostly needed. I think that these are three things where we can help, and then I encourage definitely our rail companies to work together to find where these joint projects could start.
Just a short follow-up questions. Everything that you said, is Lithuania ready to deliver in autumn? So are we talking about the readiness to deliver ASAP?
Yeah, I hope so, especially windows and roofs for the schools and kindergartens.
Thank you. Now I turn to the European Union side, and Mr. Popovsky, how European Union is preparing to deliver that emergent assistance for emergency rebuilding of Ukraine, because we understand and most associate the European Union with huge assistance, but more long-term, the process needs to get time to get rolling. Now the help is needed today. So how EU is ready for that?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Indeed, we have no time to waste, and we have to work on both the immediate needs and the mid to long-term reconstruction. And there is a link, however, to the, and I just wanted to start with that, to the historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine, because it will trigger or accelerate the reform process in the country. So the whole reconstruction is also a huge opportunity to speed up reforms and to build back better. That's very much a joint view held by the Ukrainian authorities and the Commission. So we are united in that. But looking at the reconstruction, I mean the whole reconstruction process, we now have a framework to operate with. Prime Minister Shmyhal presented Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction plan at the Lugano conference 1 week ago, which is a very good start. We also now working to set up a Ukraine reconstruction platform. We still need to sort out a number of details, but we need a meeting place. We need a forum bringing together all relevant donors with the Ukrainian government, because of course the whole process has to be owned by the Ukrainian government. But we need to coordinate. We need to find appropriate sources of funding, and the funding needs are enormous. We already have the first estimates both from the Ukrainian government and the World Bank. Minister Naim mentioned the the estimated damage only with regard to infrastructure, but of course it's much more than that. So we will do that starting actually now. But the most immediate priority is to keep the government afloat, to provide it with the necessary liquidity, not least against the backdrop of a significant loss of income. We all know of the blockade of the Black Sea ports and the difficulty to export grain and other products. So providing the government with cash is key. And since the outbreak of the war, we provided around 6 billion euro in support for both humanitarian, macro-financial assistance, which is loans on very favorable conditions, and budget support. But more has to come. So in May, the Commission announced additional assistance, macro-financial assistance, meaning long-term loans of up to 9 billion euros. And the first 1 billion should be disbursed to the government before the summer break. So this is this kind of immediate assistance that is so needed. Of course, we have to work with all other donors, with the World Bank, with the US in particular, to make sure that that there is enough liquidity and the needs are well known. The heating season is on everybody's mind. We're also working on specific solutions for ourselves, for the European Union, as we are reducing the dependence on the deliveries of Russian gas, and it comes with a cost.
Mr. Popovsky, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can we direct more and come back more to the issue of this, the emergency assistance? Because what you are saying, liquidity is basically the very important at the moment, but at the same time, what you heard from the Ukrainian side is the heating, schools, roads. Are there any mechanisms put in place or are considered to be put in place at the European level to fill in those needs?
Well, liquidity can be used for emergency funding, obviously, but we will still continue, we'll certainly continue using, for instance, the Union Civil Protection Mechanism that can provide in-kind assistance, for instance, pontoon bridges that was mentioned, or ambulances, or other equipment that is needed for very specific actions. But on top of what I mentioned, the microfinancial assistance, we are now going to provide 500 million as the so-called budget support, which is a grant to the European government, to the Ukrainian government, and the main idea is to support to cover the needs of the internally displaced persons. So, for instance, we are going to use it working with different municipalities and hramadas to fund necessary housing. I mean, the housing that needs to be provided for, like container houses for people who have been displaced internally. We're also going to provide assistance in the area of education and assistance to farmers. And this is something that we're going to pay in the next 2 weeks, certainly in July.
Okay, thank you so much. We still have two guests in our panel, turning now to business. And first of all, Mr. Abramovičius, Ukrainian business. How? First of all, of course, we see business as a contributor to the solutions of the problem. But in the case of the business sector you are representing, the agriculture business, has suffered a lot. So what kind of needs does the Ukrainian business have? And also of the initiatives that Ukrainian business is already doing to help that emergency rebuilding of the country?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So in 2014, I accidentally became Minister of Economy of Ukraine. And then years after, I accidentally became CEO of Ukroboronprom. But 15 years ago, I accidentally became a farmer. So we have a 40,000 hectare farm just outside Kiev in Chernigov. And we are one of the few largest Lithuanian companies in Ukraine, along with I see Ivaras here from BT Invest and Darius from BGS. And business has experienced massive problems, but is very rapidly, in certain cases, recovering. So I hear Novus already has all stores except for 2 in Bucha reopened, and we planted 99% of our acreage compared to last year, even though 40% of land is based in Chernigov, all of which was occupied during the first few weeks of the year. While we know American leadership suggested moving heaven and earth for Ukraine, and I'm sure Lithuania and European leadership will do exactly the same, there are some very immediate problems that need to be resolved now, especially as Vadim Denisenko said, only strong economically Ukraine can survive and resist aggression and win the war. So some of those are. Here, like Kubilius said, Lithuania shall not only focus on bilateral efforts, but really be an advocate of Ukraine continuously in Europe. So first, export infrastructure needs to be massively improved. We still have tens and tens of kilometers of lineups in all checkpoints leaving and entering Ukraine. And here, Ukrainian efforts are not enough. The Poles and the Czechs and the Hungarians and even Lithuanians need to sit down and resolve that. So what we need to do is we need to do faster, cheaper, and more. Unfortunately, exports of grain are now more expensive than during the first weeks of the war. So something is wrong on planet Earth, so to say. So all these government officials need to sit down and resolve and make sure that export of grain is cheap, because export price in Klaipėda for wheat is 370 euros. Purchasing price in Ukraine is 100 euros. So Ukrainian farmer, if is not having access to working capital and selling grains at a good price, will not have money to plant next year. Second point is macroeconomic stability. So far, miracles have happened, again, due to external support, among other things, but also Central Bank of Ukraine and government and President Office and everyone else. Kudos to them. Needs to continue. Third, EU and world organizations should provide war insurance for the ships, rail cars, trucks entering Ukraine, again, to decrease the price of logistics. And fourth, perhaps given the low price outlook for grain, I think Ukrainian government, together with the financial support of global organizations, should start buying up grain from farmers at regulated prices, which are not $100 per ton, but more, so that in autumn this year and in spring next year, farmers have something basically in their bank account to prepare for the next sowing campaign. So there are some immediate helps, and I believe Ukraine will change forever. Finally, investing in Ukraine will be very attractive because multiples to exit that type of business in the future will be much higher because of EU ties compared to what was before. But obviously, we need to end the war on a winning note before substantial investments start to flow in. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gedvilas, Lithuanian business, are you ready to assist? Are you already doing? And what kind of support or assistance from the European Union or from the Lithuanian government do you need in order that assistance to take place?
Thank you. At the first, I want to say that 1 month ago was in Ukraine and I saw sad sight and I saw destroyed buildings, bridges, and I talked with local residents. Helps need all branches of economic Ukraine, and today we have big challenge with insurance. When Lithuanian business can send workers in Ukraine, we're thinking about insurance, about people insure, about equipment insure, and today we have big challenge, and we're discussing with Environment Ministerium, with Ministerium Economic and Innovation, and discussing how to solve this problem. We remember time when Lithuanian rebuilt Afghanistan. We have experience and we have special law, and this law help business to rebuild Goro Provincial in Afghanistan, and I think this question we need to take in Lithuanian government agenda, and we need discussing about insurance question. And in short time, I think we have a possibility to supply construction materials in Ukraine. And before we don't solve problems with insurance, we don't have possibility to send workers in Ukraine. The first question, I think question is European level, and I believe that all countries, all business in Europe have same question, insurance question. And also Lithuanian Confederation Industrialists working together with Lithuanian government and creating special rebuilding plan how to support, how rebuild Ukraine, and Ukrainians become joint European Union is candidate today in European Union, and we're thinking that it's very important thinking and discussing about sustainable infrastructure of Ukraine, and we discussing about some tools how implement in Ukraine construction industry and using digitalization tools. And I think maybe it's future plan, but in short time I think it's possible to supply construction materials, equipment before we solving problem with insurance.
I turn to the panel for the second round for short responses, because there were several moments where I saw that panelists want to respond. So I will give shortly the space for that. We have 5 minutes left, and I will give also a chance for one question from the audience, at least one. So if you have one very good question, please raise your hand. There are 2 people on both sides with the microphones. So coming back, the 2 elements that I thought that I mentioned, I want to come back. One is the question of insurance that was raised already by both business representatives, and also I would like to give the floor to the mayor, because I saw that he was very emotionally reacting to the response of Mr. Popovsky. So first, about the insurance, maybe both Deputy Minister and also if there is a place here for the European response for Mr. Popovsky.
Thank you for the question. Yes. Thank you for the question, and yes, the situation is very well known, and the problem is that the insurance is business as well, and in every insurance contract we have the clause which actually talks about force majeure and the war, actually, and then the insurance is not applied. Yes, I can 100% agree. It should be maybe not even a European, it could be an international discussion how we have to act in these kind of the situation, not only in Ukraine, because we have a different military and other kind of conflicts all around the world where insurance is needed. But another thing is that within the government and together with the business community, we are actually discussing how to compensate maybe some insurance if insurance companies actually decides to give a guarantee. So this is what we actually could do.
Shortly, Mr. Popovsky, does the European Union have any action or discussions in this regard?
Look, we are aware of it, and I very much agree with the Deputy Minister. It's a market, so we cannot force the market companies to do things. But what we certainly have in mind to create space for the business community at large in the reconstruction process. And President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Šmyhal had a joint discussion with the CEOs of a number of big global companies at the meeting in Davos a few months ago. And there was a lot of interest, not only purely business interest, but also readiness to contribute to the effort. So I guess that would also apply to some of the insurance companies.
Minister Lukeria, Deputy Minister Lukeria, sorry, you definitely have incoming requests, not necessarily requests, offers of help from many countries around the world, including the European Union countries. How you coordinate those assistance provisions and offers, and maybe in there you have already some solutions for the worries voiced here by the business representatives. Very shortly, 30 seconds.
Дуже коротко. У нас сформований перелік.
Very shortly, we have
в частині охорони.
We have a list of the objects that we need to renew pretty fast. We need to make sure that the kids can go to school. We need to do the heating and the corresponding request we've been sending to all of our partners, and we're clearly answering where the need is and where the need is no longer. The same thing will be happening with our partners in Lithuania to show which problems are open problems and which problems are closed problems. So this will be very straightforward and very honest process, very transparent one.
Thank you so much. And now I turn to the mayor. You were very emotionally reacting, so would you be willing also to voice your reaction? Is the mayor still with us?
Ви маєте на увазі, коли говорив представник Європейського Союзу?
You mean when the representative of the European Union was speaking? Yeah, I'm going to tell you. He seems like a sleeping person to me, the person that knows about this war from the movie theater or from TV. He is not understanding that the war is in Ukraine, that Ukraine is defending European values and existence of European Union, and he is calmly speaking about, well, we can do that or we can do that. There's going to be 500 million so people can live in containers. When we need to be talking about serious stuff. We need to be talking about the fact that cities that are not yet destroyed, like Nikolaev, like people need things. People need shelters. People don't need the containers to live. People don't want to leave. People want to fight. People want to fight with Russia. And we need to understand that, and we don't need the containers to be bought. Like, you should not be paying us off with 500 millions. That is nothing compared to your freedom. The most important things are life and freedom. People don't want to leave their cities. Ones that wanted to leave left, but ones that don't want, they're gonna stay. They want to have shelter for the kids, for themselves. They want to fight for the cities. They do not want to let Russians in, and that's how we're gonna save Europe and European values. Sorry, I forgot his name, but he seemed to me like someone who just watched a movie or saw it on TV, like this is a usual thing. This is lives of people. This is lives of families that are being destroyed. We need the resources. We need construction materials to maintain the residential buildings that was destroyed. We need finances. We're not talking about people coming to us and build for us. We don't really care about the insurances. We need financials. We need materials to build up our houses.
Mayor, Mrs. Mayor, I'm sorry, I have to cut
especially
you
about
here
the front line.
because we are running out of time.
I'm talking about heating stations.
Unfortunately,
I'm not talking about
we had
containers.
only 45 minutes, which is a time frame of one normal school lecture, to paint the picture of what is needed to help Ukraine to rebuild the most basic needs, the critical infrastructure, the social infrastructure. We had the time that we had. I'm sure there is a broad understanding of the urgency in the panel, also at the European level in Lithuania, for sure. We got a clearer picture of the needs. There is definitely a resolve on this side to assist and help. The only question is to make everything possible to make that assistance happen sooner and not later. So I thank all the panelists, also thank all the Ukrainian side and the representative of the European Union. And I also announce now the break and before this third session starts. Thank you so much.
Nu, merai jie visi tokie. We have 2 minutes left before the next session. Tai bus labai įdomu pabendrauti ir bus įdomu pratęsti. Please come back to the meeting room. Please come back. We're starting the next session. My name is Dovydas Vitkauskas. I'm director of SOS Ukraine, working on charity, on support to Ukrainian institutions, Ukrainian refugees, working with the governments of Lithuania and international players. Today we have a very important panel talking about financing of the rebuilding of Ukraine. And of course, we all understand that there are more questions than answers at this stage. I would say that, first of all, well, for me, the main question is where to take the money and how to make sure that, for instance, private sector has incentives and financial instruments to participate together with public players, international institutions, governments, and international development organizations together. What will be the proportion of grants and loans given with guarantees by supranational banks and other financial institutions? How to attract foreign investment to Ukraine? I think that would be a key question. We should not only focus on donor support, we should definitely try to make sure that private sector all around the world and foreign investors in particular are incentivized to come to Ukraine and to continue doing business there or expand their business. Questions arise about how to make sure that Ukraine has tools in place to absorb the money in a way that is transparent, efficient, targeted. And in this respect, of course, again, we will have to have this unpleasant discussion about governance, about corruption, etc., to make sure that whatever money comes from in whatever shape or form is absorbed in the most transparent, efficient, and targeted fashion. Again, the elephant in the room perhaps is, what is this point in time when the actual donor support or investment is possible? What is the timing which we can foresee, and what are the preconditions for the security and political situation in order for any support, any significant support to come. And of course, from what we see today is, for instance, I just read recently that the World Bank loans are now basically being used for paying public sector salaries. So for the time being, there's still no investment in Ukraine. We're still trying to keep the country afloat. And of course, the purpose of this discussion today and the purpose of all our joint efforts should be to make sure that we have clear conditions, clear targets, clear processes in place in order to be ready when the time comes to help Ukraine in the most effective and efficient way. So we have a lot to talk about. I won't take too much of your time for now. We have 6 speakers with us today, so perhaps with this I would like to invite Giedrė Balčytytė, Chancellor of Lithuanian Government. Nerijus Udrėnas, the head of charity, Food for Ukraine. We also have with us today speakers who are connecting online. Kyrylo Kryvolapas from the Ukrainian government, advisor to the government of Ukraine. We have Tymofiy'us Mylovanovas, head of Kyiv School of Economics. We have Baher El-Hifnavi, program leader from World Bank, and Vadim Boychenko, mayor of Mariupol. Okay, thank you. So let's start with Giedrė. Perhaps I mentioned already that for me, for instance, the key question is what would be the whole, let's say, pot of support for Ukraine, including grants by international players, loans with guarantees from supranational banks and financial institutions, and perhaps also foreign investment, which we still expect to make up part of this whole support assistance package. We heard Prime Minister Šmyhal mentioning in Luhano the amount of $750 billion in total as the assessment of needs, preliminary assessment of needs by Ukraine. So to what extent these, in your opinion, these expectations, these needs and possibilities match, and to what extent we together, of course with public players in the first place, but also with private players, are willing and capable to guarantee that we provide the support that Ukraine needs?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And the question is fundamental. You started with the most difficult question, whether we are in a position to meet the needs of Ukraine. I think starting from the needs of Ukraine, we clearly yet not in a position to say what are the actual needs in general. So this is a preliminary estimate, and clearly it may change dramatically during the course of the days, and it's an enormous task to be achieved. But when we talk about different modalities which you mentioned, and I would like to draw attention to few aspects. First of all, I think when we talk about, we should talk about short-term needs and demands by Ukraine, by reconstruction, which would be emergency infrastructure most certainly, and maybe also technical support to build these capacities, which you already mentioned in your introduction, to build capacities to administer the huge amount of resources that would come for reconstruction in whichever form. So when we talk about the short term, I'm sure also Ukrainian partners, they rely more on bilateral support, which means countries would develop partnerships with specific areas and would support reconstruction of emergency infrastructure, meaning to have possibility to maintain just basic services. That's what already was mentioned in different formats. So this short-term needs that would come from bilateral support, partner to partner, like Lithuania to Ukraine, and then would rely on capacity of each country individually. And then, of course, there is this general budgetary support, which comes already to support to maintain Ukraine's capacity as a country, as it was said, pay salaries and have the general administrative needs being met. But then we have to separate that with a medium long term, and we all expect the war will be over as soon as possible with a most positive outcome, and therefore then it's this medium long term mechanism should get into force, and it would rely more on multilateral support. And this is then different countries, as Lithuania as well, would be contributing through multilateral modalities, because then it starts to be really this huge exercise, which needs definitely very clear priorities, with a very clear governance structure, very clear priorities, being very well coordinated, and have all accountability and other mechanisms in place. So how much of what, I think it's very difficult to say at this stage, but clearly the initial stage would more rely on bilateral grants support, and also probably public-private some cooperation investment in this regard. But later on, clearly, I think we will evolve as we go. There are definitely different modalities being considered, and I'm sure these would be developed together in a partnership also with Ukraine, but between multilateral donors that would be contributing to this huge effort.
How do you see the participation of the private sector and foreign investors in particular? How to make sure that governments in Lithuania, but also in the EU, create favorable incentives, conditions for private sector to contribute at that later stage that you mentioned in particular?
But I think there is no possibility to rebuild a country without direct and very active participation of private sector. So clearly, I can say that currently Lithuanian government is also building frameworks that would support also private sector participation in both national efforts, bilateral, but also these multilateral efforts, because clearly there are some countries that have these frameworks developed. Lithuania didn't. So we have to build these frameworks to be able to provide consolidated support, because huge efforts, huge resources, huge capacity needs, and therefore we need to build these frameworks that would bring together our private sector, that would be in a position to participate in reconstructions using multilateral funding. But also, by building this framework, we are developing our national current framework, which would be also aligned with something that we will be doing in the future. I feel it's complicated, but clearly you should understand, when this happens, countries like ours, we didn't have neither legal frameworks to give support to other country without legal background. So we have to build also legal, but also organizational frameworks that would allow us to be efficient. And we are building it, and we are already well advanced. So I'm sure we will be very much in position already this year to provide first direct support to specific projects in Ukraine.
You mentioned bilateral support, and with this I will segue with my question to Kyrylo Kryvolapas. Prime Minister Shmyhal in Lugano mentioned a very interesting idea about so-called patronage, where Ukraine is basically giving some of its regions to particular countries or groupings of countries to be patrons of regional development. I saw, for instance, a very nice map with France and Switzerland in Odessa region, etc. So, Kyrylo, question to you: how do you see this patronage idea, the risks, the benefits, and of course, to me as a lawyer, it's a main question. Whatever country takes charge of rebuilding any region of Ukraine, you still have land lease decisions to be issued according to Ukrainian law and practice. You need building permits to be issued according to Ukrainian law and practice, disputes settled according to Ukrainian law and practice. So how do you see this sort of interaction between foreign process and foreign approach and the Ukrainian reality that will need to create conditions for this patronage idea to fly?
As for the patronage, it's a part of a joint vision about Ukrainian recovery. I guess you all understand that we need to come to a joint vision, which will cover the immediate needs, which will cover the short-term recovery and long-term modernization of the country. And we need to come up to understanding of security guarantees and then the financing. So as for this part of this vision, as for the patronage, the idea is that It will allow, of course, to concentrate efforts of countries and to concentrate responsibility on specific regions, which is easier. For example, if UK government, for example, doesn't supply some fund or some agency, because now it's clear that there will be no single agency. There is no way Ukrainian recovery can be covered by one institution or one gigantic fund. So probably we talk about a coordination platform, and we talk about the some multiple funds, multiple programs which will concentrate on specific topics. So patronage is a part of it. And for example, for UK, it's easier to support the recovery of Kyiv region. It's easier for them to create some sort of an agency in UK which will concentrate on this recovery, which will attract Ukrainian subcontractors, because Ukrainian subcontracting, Ukrainian participation and Ukrainian ownership should be a part of it. And Ukrainian government from its side will provide some sort of parameters. This is the other word, another word, like parametrical and regional. And the Ukrainian government will explain that we would like to see this level of infrastructure, this level of social nets which were present before the war and which were in the process of construction prior to the war. So as for the legal framework, I personally don't think that Ukraine will create some specific zones of foreign rule on the territory of Ukraine, so probably we'll use Ukrainian law. But as you probably saw, now there's a big process of deregulation going on, digitalization, and there will be much more transparency and much more more speed in those processes. So I think that Ukraine should show that we surprised the world with our bravery and with our strengths. So we should surprise the world with our transparency and anti-corruption mechanisms.
Thank you. Thanks. I agree also that having spent some time in Ukraine and looking at the achievement, especially with electronic government, with DIA and similar projects, I think you will have also a thing or two to teach to some of our Western European counterparts as well. I will segue now to Tymofiy'us Mylovanovas. Hi, Tymofy. So good to see you. It looks like ages since last time we met. That was in December, I believe, your wedding ceremony in Kiev. It seems like ages ago. You're looking good. Is it okay? Can you hear us? Tymofy, question to you as an academic expert, but also advisor at the high level, former minister. We talk a lot about donors. We talk a lot about, let's say, unconditional money. But what about foreign investors as a source of a key resource for rebuilding Ukraine? Ukraine has a lot of state-owned enterprises which are yet to be privatized. Ukraine launched a year ago the project to privatize agricultural land. So Ukraine still has actually this benefit of having a lot of resources in the hands of the state that could be a very good incentive, actually probably the perfect incentive for private sector investors, for foreign investors to come in and act as a key resource for the rebuilding. So what is your take on that, especially on privatization of state-owned enterprises? Is there a viable plan? And also on land, what are the next steps, and to what extent Ukraine could maximize the ability to privatize land and state-owned enterprises for the benefit and to maximize the resources in the rebuilding?
Thank you, and it's good to see you too. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I'm in an interesting position, in a broad position in many ways. On the one hand, I'm an academic, and I also lead the Kyiv School of Economics, which is involved greatly, jointly, for example, with the Center for Economic Recovery, Kyrylo is leading, and with the World Bank, Bacher is leading the project on damage assessment. At the same time, I was a Minister of Economy and Agriculture, and we did the land market reform, to which you are alluding right now. It is true that one of the big issues is the incentives for the private financing, for private investment to come to Ukraine. We're in the middle of the war, so this is an extremely difficult situation. At least two issues have to be addressed on part of the entire list that we have been discussing, from governance to access to resources, to permits, to anti-corruption. that there should be a war insurance. Because the private funds, they have private funding has difficult, they just simply don't have the framework to assess and evaluate the war risks. And so unless there is war risk, I fear insurance, I fear that even after the war, that risk will not necessarily disappear, at least perception of that risk fully. And so that will be a major impediment. And so that's one issue. The Ukrainian government, together with the international partners, have to come up with the mechanism to ensure the private investment against the war risks. The second aspect is, of course, access to financing. A lot of export credit agencies of individual countries can provide insurance or guarantees or access to financing for the private investment. The opportunities will be there after the war. Ukraine has the status of candidacy, so there is a prospect of having serious access to the EU market, and so that model access to the market, we have seen it working out for many countries, Poland being one of the examples, and so Ukraine could very well be a country which will take advantage of that. You mentioned the state-owned enterprises. The war has the tendency for the government to increase its role, because the coordination mechanisms have to be implemented fast, and the government works faster during the war than the markets. And markets are distorted often because the price mechanisms collapse. So in that way, the state-owned enterprises will be responding to this gravity of the situation. And many of the, especially in the energy, many of the companies would be perceived of strategic nature, but also in logistics and infrastructure, and of course in defense. So the government is likely to move towards private public partnerships and corporatization and partial privatization rather than full privatization. That raises the issue of protection of the partners or minority shareholders' rights. And so that requires judicial reform, or at least a serious change and transformation. That transformation is possible. As 2014-2016 demonstrated, the banking system was possible to clean up. So I believe the judicial reform is also possible. That will have to be done.
Thanks, Timofey. You mentioned the judicial reform and the governance improvements. What are the key immediate steps you think Ukraine needs to take in order to improve governance, public administration, and also the judicial and law enforcement sectors?
So at this moment, today, we are speaking today in the war. What I can tell subjectively is that the level of vested interest, influence, capture, monopoly power, abuse, corruption too has come down drastically. There's a viral video I think released today or yesterday, where a police officer is somewhere in the east of Ukraine is accused of taking a bribe for passing a checkpoint, 200 hryvnias, and the military immediately arrests him. So there's very little tolerance right now for any kind of foul play. So I think right now the issue is about institutionalization and competence. So professionalization and institutionalization. So I'm more concerned at this point, not after the war, but at this point, I'm more concerned about dysfunctionality when different parts of the government and local and national government, and then political elites, they can be pulling or be played to create dysfunctionality and conflicts. Once the war subsides and we move into the peace period, the vested interest will try to recover, and their influence. And that's where we will need to be very, very careful and very, very fast about clear governance and judicial and law enforcement reforms.
Thanks, Timofey. Nereus, again, coming back to more strategic level assessment, the price tag of $750 billion that Prime Minister Shmyhal mentioned, the capacity of Ukraine to absorb, yes or no?
Thank you. Do you hear? I would like just a short note. that now I'm leading the charity, which is already was able to donate 1.4 million worth of food kits for about 350,000 families worth for a week to survive. So I'm very glad. And before that, I worked in Ukraine from 2014 to 2017 as an advisor on European affairs. So I know a price tag is quite tremendous, but it's for sure a capacity in Ukraine. There are many bright people. Of course, institutional framework, it needs to be kind of enhanced. But what we have experience from all around Europe and of Lithuania as well. And one of the items I would like to suggest, for example, for soldiers on the front and for people, ordinary people in Ukraine, they need to have a clear purpose, very visual purpose. What does it mean to be in Europe? What does it mean to be winning the war? And I think many families still have a dream to have an apartment, to own an apartment. And that's still an issue. There was a problem of underinvestment in housing even before the war. Now there's an even more dire need for that. So if you have an image of a family owning an apartment, a modern apartment, a European-style apartment, how to finance it? And we have experience from Lithuania, but there are more experiences how to model that. And one of the things, like Lithuania, we have a modernization of housing program where there is senior debt, which is completely commercial banks. There's junior debt where international financial institutions participate, and there is first layer, first loss debt layer where European structural funds can participate. And in this way, such a pie can create a framework of fund which could be utilized to financing the banking sector and mortgages for families. So while families in Ukraine, only 4.7% of household debt is on them, while in Europe is above 50%. So there is a big room for expansion. And once you provide this financing, while the Ukrainian government could kind of establish 25-year period for fixed interest rates for mortgages, and for 5%, for example, while the difference would be financed by Ukrainian government bonds, while these bonds will be underwritten by such structural funds pie or European solidarity kind of purchases of these government funds, this would create a future perception that Ukraine is ready for the bright future, that there is an opportunity to build housing already now. And this is sourced locally. The materials, building materials, 85%, 95% of these building materials are locally sourced. So it will create a huge impact for local manufacturing to recover. So one would not need 750 billion right away. You could put yourself through internal demand fostering through this kind of money. And this money would be able to come fast, soon. There is market mechanisms for that. You just need a little tweak and trust from European partners to act now.
Thanks. I think we're coming to this understanding that at the end of the day, we want to build a modern economy in Ukraine, which relies not so much on cash, upfront cash, but relies on a stable and efficient banking system and financing system, with which I'm segueing into my question to Baher, the World Bank representative. What still needs to be done to create a proper, transparent, effective, and efficient banking system in Ukraine? And to what extent World Bank can contribute?
Thank you, Davidas, for having me on this distinguished panel and for the opportunity to participate. I will respond to the question, but I just want to backtrack a little bit and then get to the question. Because the figure of 750 billion is often quoted. And I think it's very important that we distinguish between different numbers, because as we all also know, we have heard damage figures of around 95 billion, 100 billion, 105 billion. Then we jump to 750. I think it's important to distinguish between the damages, which are easy to estimate, the economic losses, and this is when you start getting into these much higher figures, and then the needs, which is actually what will be needed by Ukraine in order to reconstruct. So the figure of 750 typically involves a lot of the losses, and actually is not what one would be looking at when they're looking at the investment in Ukraine. That number also is quite overwhelming. If we look at 750 million and start saying, what will 2-3 billion do? So I think it's important to focus more on the needs, and I do want to take a minute, perhaps at some point, to talk about the damage and needs assessment that we are working on with the government, with the Kiev School of Economics, with the European Union, and in collaboration with other partners, because that's kind of helping to set one figure, even though it's rapid, and as the Exchequer had mentioned in the beginning, it's still very preliminary figures. The war is still ongoing, but it gives a sense of what these figures are. And then we go from that to, again, the prioritization, as the previous speaker was saying, to look at it perhaps in the context of a few years at a time, particularly that one of the big constraints is going to be Ukraine's absorptive capacity. So that is also one issue when you look at it. Banking is one of it, implementation is another, the ability to attract private sector. There are lots of issues when we look at the absorptive capacity of Ukraine. Then we say, okay, from that perspective, we can get a better sense of how many billion can be actually absorbed in the first few years after the war, and then the second phase after that, and the third phase after that. That has the advantage of showing the amounts and helping in the planning from Ukraine's perspective, but also helping the development partners to plan for the support to Ukraine. These are some of the critical issues there. But when it comes, as you are asking, to the banking sector, a lot of it has to do with transparency. A lot of it has to do with the governance. Supervisory boards have been some of the issues that Ukraine has been grappling with for the past few years. The selection of prioritizations of the project, these are all areas that the World Bank is supporting with. It's as you may know, I know you know, as others may know, that the World Bank, its support is not just with loans, but to try to support also in building the institutions and strengthening the institutions. And in the banking sector, it's working through both providing loans to banks, but also in trying to get the right framework that, again, will help in this reconstruction. And when we look at energy efficiency, when we look at agriculture, it's not a loan from the bank is not going to help as much as getting leverage from the banking sector and then have them start providing the loan to the specific sectors.
Thanks so much, Bahir. We have Mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko, with us. And of course, I think you should give us, Vadim, a reality check, because you represent the city, the region that is arguably the most devastated so far by the war impact. So what is your assessment of the needs, and to what extent we could realistically expect the political and security situation to be stable enough to even start planning rebuilding of your region?
Дякую сьогодні за можливість брати участь.
I'm super happy for the opportunity to be here. But today we also need to understand what's happening in Mariupol right now. On 24th of February, the big war has started. Fast enough, they surrounded our heroic city of Mariupol, and in just 4 days, all the infrastructure was the target of the attack. They left us without electricity, without water, without heating, and sadly without connection as well. Today we have the outcomes of such operation. We have almost destroyed city. Out of 22.6 thousand buildings, 90% of the buildings are partially destroyed. And 70% of them are 1,350 buildings are destroyed fully. They have also destroyed the social infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, the roads. we need to understand that they have caused more problems than the Nazi army from 1941 to 1943, because Nazis killed 10,000 people, and Russians have already killed 20,000 people. And today there is no point in waiting when we're gonna liberate the territories that are occupied by Russian Federation. Today we need to prepare for a new life in the city. And I'm very thankful to our partners that are able to unite together to do this, to make it happen. Super thankful to World Bank for the help that they are providing to us. It's great that many people are working on renewal of the city of Mariupol. So we have a few stages of the plan from 0 to 1 year, from 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 10. So we believe that in 10 years we'll be able to fully restore the city into a great European one. And as of right now, we're counting with our experts how much money would it cost to renew the city. So it would be 14.5 billion euros that we'll need to rebuild the city. As of right now, this is a step-by-step plan that we are building to implement in 3 months. And later on, the Marshall Plan would be a great help for us to help. And of course, we're waiting for deblocation of Mariupol, and we're awaiting our military to go into counterattack, and hopefully in January of next year, the city will be
Thanks so much.
Liberated from Russian occupants.
Kyryl, I'm segueing back to you. Ukrainian government has always surprised me when I worked there with very creative approach to various strategic questions of governance. And I think an interesting idea was pitched and is being now actively and publicly promoted by the Ukrainian government to use the funds of frozen Russian sanctioned entities and persons, the oligarchs, in order to confiscate those assets and use that additional pie to help in the rebuilding. So what is your take on any successes of the strategy so far, and what are the next steps?
Because Russian assets, it's a big number. So if we talk about this estimate of hundreds of billions needed to recover Ukraine, and we estimate that it's far beyond $300 billion of frozen Russian assets, maybe closer to 500, then it's a big asset, and we need an approach for that. And we follow Canadian exercise, which they are ongoing. They try to connect the legislation with this aim, with this goal to confiscate those assets and appoint and send those money to Ukrainian needs. And we would like that this experience would be shared by other governments. There was a meeting with the government of Netherlands yesterday, and they say that they also look at the Canadians and they want to use this way to confiscate assets. We don't actually think that it's the right way when other countries are confiscating some assets and sending them to own budgets or sell them to own businesses, because Ukraine then doesn't have any access to this money. And I think that our moral right for this money is because Russia probably will not pay reparations, because someone needs to occupy Russia, and in this case they will need to pay reparations, but possibly it's not feasible at the moment. So that's why we're talking about those assets. But what actually our Minister of Economy, our Prime Minister are suggesting is to use those assets for insurance of country risks. For example, to help UK business, help Canadian or American business to invest in Ukraine and have those investments insured by those funds. And this idea is quite clear, quite understandable for IFIs and for governments to use this money not just to send them to Ukraine, not just to send those yachts and create a big cruise fleet to Ukraine, for example, but to use it to create joint interest and create joint business with those countries. So I think that this insurance idea is #1 priority for Ministry of Economy in this regard.
Great, good luck with that. As someone having 2 law degrees and some experience in human rights, I could say that you will be facing an uphill struggle in Western legal systems to create those conditions, but I wish you success, and I think we all wish you success, and I think we should be following very closely the Canadian example that you mentioned, where new legislation is going to be introduced in order to link the purpose of national security and the threat of national security with possible freezing and confiscation, which would be a very, very novel legal tool, I think, in most of the democratic jurisdictions. So good luck with that. At the same time, I'm a bit skeptical about a yacht being a very feasible asset, because it looks like something very expensive at first glance, but when you add fixed costs of oiling, greasing, maintenance, food, etc., it looks more like a liability. So I wish you to get more real, tangible, liquid assets rather than yachts eventually. And I think it's very interesting that you mentioned the idea of insurance for foreign investment as a way to also use those funds and monetize them at the end of the day for the benefit of Ukraine. So thanks, we will be following these developments very closely. Baher, back to you also as World Bank representative. We are following closely what World Bank is doing, and we see that now currently the loans, a few $1 billion or so, the last tranche, are being used basically only for keeping Ukraine afloat, for paying public sector salaries. What's next for World Bank in the immediate perspective?
Thanks very much again for the question. This has stemmed again from the need that the government has a monthly deficit of 3.1 billion. This was kind of the average for April and May. It's going up to, expected to go up to 5 billion. So if the macro is not stable, if the fiscal is not there, then all these other things that we're talking about are not going to happen. The private sector is not going to come. All these projects are not going to happen. So it's a struggle that we've had as the bank, that we're not getting involved directly in projects, but supporting the budget. This still remains to be one of the main, perhaps the top priority for the World Bank in supporting that with the help of development partners. I do have to acknowledge that the 6.75 billion that the World Bank has helped mobilize, a lot of this is actually grants, guarantees, parallel financing from development partners. So we have to acknowledge that, and out of that, something that we actually are proud of, because the development community is not very fast, that out of that more than 4.5 billion have already been disbursed to help Ukraine. But right now we are also trying to identify opportunities in some of the critical sectors that we can provide support in. For this to happen, we need to have guarantees from development partners, because simply the World Bank has put all it can in Ukraine. So anything beyond what is already there will have to be covered by guarantees from development partners. Right now, there is discussion to move quickly on a project for grain and food security that benefits Ukraine, but also is of global importance. This is something that will be supporting the railways, which has done a phenomenal role during the past few months of the war, evacuating people and getting the supplies, moving supplies back and forth. But they do have issues in, again, crossing the border, different gauges, different technical issues. So there is some project that is being discussed for that. There is some project that is being discussed, again, other partners involved, for the storage for the grain, because this is going to be a very critical situation. We are looking again when it comes to connection of utilities, urgent repairs, heating for the upcoming winter season, health, as you can expect, with the war ongoing, social protection. So these are all areas that we are looking to get involved in, but our hands are a little tied, because we do need them to get the guarantees from development partners. And these guarantees, again, it's a question of, do you target them towards the budget, which is very much in need, or towards these investments? So it's not an easy choice, and it's a balance that has to be obviously worked and decided by the government of Ukraine and the development partners.
Thanks so much, Bahir. Any questions from our audience, perhaps? We still have some minutes left for the discussion. If not, then I will try to wrap up. Thanks to our participants, we have discussed today, I think, a very wide array of strategic issues. First of all, the actual assessment of needs, as mentioned by our World Bank and other representatives, is a complex task. We heard this price tag of 750 billion, but really the real assessment of losses, the loss of opportunity, the actual damage, the actual overall needs is a very complex task. So we still have to work together, I think, towards a more reasonable assessment. Nereus and others mentioned that we have to focus not so much on giving Ukraine cash upfront, but trying to promote a viable, working, transparent banking system. And Ukraine, since 2014, is already on good track of doing that. I don't know whether any of you know, but Ukraine had more than 200 licensed banks at the Yanukovych era, and immediately in the aftermath reduced the amount of banks currently to, I believe, 68 or 69. So already Ukraine still has a lot of banks, but the system is much healthier than it was 8 years ago. So let's hope, I think, that building a proper, transparent, efficient banking system will be among primary tasks of all of us together, Ukrainian stakeholders and international stakeholders together. Kirill mentioned the idea of, or let's say transforming the idea of taking the money of Russian oligarchs and using it as insurance to facilitate and stimulate and incentivize and secure foreign investment as a very interesting idea also to be reflected in the future. And of course, in this respect, we need to follow developments which will need to take place also at the legislative level in many Western jurisdictions in order for this strategy to take place. We discussed together with Tymofiy'us mentioned privatization of land and privatization of state-owned enterprises as another source, a very realistic source, which could be used to fund the rebuilding of Ukraine, and Tymofiy'us mentioned also that it could be partial solutions rather than full privatization solutions. So again, we will need to have probably together to work out a strategy for particular sectors, for particular entities in order to have clear, viable and working approach towards privatization. Privatization of land, also an absolutely essential element to create finally proper market economy in Ukraine, to allow farmers, but not only farmers, other economic players to monetize land, again, against the mortgage. That will be a key element to building financial system, but also freeing up more resources for the actual rebuilding. Tymofiy'us, Kirill mentioned also that, and I agree with you as a consultant, having worked more than 5 years in Ukraine, Western players also have some things to learn from Ukraine in order to automate the processes. So I think we will be following very, very closely the idea of patronage and different countries working in different Ukrainian regions where we expect a two-way street of Western processes, but also Ukraine sharing best practices and teaching our Western counterparts of some better processes of running and funding and implementing these huge investment projects. So all in all, I think we still have more questions than answers, but I think we're together with you, and thanks to our panel today, thanks to our organizers, Aušrinė, her team, and Lithuanian government, that we will come closer to answering those very complex questions, and we'll work together to rebuild Ukraine and rebuild a better Ukraine. Thank you. With this, I'm giving the floor to Linas Kojala to have a wrap-up message. Lina?
Well, thank you very much. Hopefully this works. Thank you very much. It's not easy to wrap up and to summarize so many interesting and important thoughts that were discussed throughout this conference, but I'll try to be very brief and talk about 3 points that struck me throughout this event today. So first of all, of course, we must recognize the scale of the economic devastation that Ukraine is currently facing. Ukraine certainly has a mountain to climb to solve the issues that are coming up every day. And just a couple of points that were discussed today on this. So the budget revenues of Ukraine suffered an enormous loss because of war. Ukraine must borrow $5 billion every month just to maintain its current level of services. Ukrainian GDP will probably collapse by 35% this year. And let's remember, it was supposed to grow by 3 to 4%, a really healthy growth prior to the war. The price tag of reconstruction was widely discussed. And it probably doesn't matter whether it's 750 billion euros, 1 trillion, or whatever the number, we understand it's even hard to grasp the amount that's going to be needed. And people, of course, we have to focus on people. A lot of Ukrainians left the country. They didn't want to do it, but they've left and they will need to return. And even prior to war, 55% of Ukrainians in 2019 in one opinion survey said that immigration is the biggest challenge for the country in the long-term future. So, of course, the war, the brain drain, makes this problem even bigger. And finally, on this, we have to find the right balance between the short-term and long-term. Some of the things that we've discussed focus on the long-term development of Ukraine, and that's obviously essential. But some other aspects are needed today. For instance, we know that the heating season is unfortunately coming up, and people will need to be warm in their homes. Water needs to be supplied daily. Businesses need to move their goods and sell their goods today, not tomorrow. So I think the Western community really needs to find this right balance between supporting Ukraine in the long term, but also ensuring the support comes basically now. The second aspect that I wanted to touch upon is, I think, a more positive one, which is that we are on the right path, I would argue. The timely preparations are taking place in order to make this effort at least the most effective possible. So I think we've heard that the Ukrainian economy was stabilized as much as possible in today's circumstances, and the spirit of Ukrainian people is still strong. We also hear that Ukrainian governmental institutions work 24/7, which is obviously very much important to ensure as much stability as possible. We also know that various international organizations and governments contribute to Ukrainian effort, basically, again, daily. The European Union, the World Bank, the United States of America, and national governments as well. And I think it was important to hear that even this week, Lithuanian government, as the Prime Minister said, allocated another 10 million euros, which is not necessarily a game changer, but also an important message to all of us, because it's just a small part of a bigger effort to ensure that Ukraine manages to solve some of the issues that it's facing today. And these discussions, such as this conference, such as a conference in Switzerland, are very important to make this message heard all around the globe. And finally, my last point comes from a quote from Winston Churchill, who said that never let the good crisis go to waste. It's certainly not a crisis we're talking about, it's a devastating war, but I think we have to look at Ukraine being stronger than before, and not only rebuilding itself, but being more capable and more developed in the future than ever before. And I'll use the framework proposed by Lena Kościarny, who is the head of American Chamber of Commerce in Ukraine, who said that the future of Ukrainian economy is based on 3 aspects: hands, brains, and grains. So the hands part was widely touched upon today, and we've heard a lot about the devastation to the Ukrainian infrastructure. One thing that struck me is that 310 bridges of Ukraine have been destroyed, which obviously shows the scale of damage for the Ukrainian infrastructure. Schools, 1,100 at least schools were damaged or destroyed, which again shows how long-lasting damage will be. But I think Ukrainian people are known from history to be capable of building, to be capable of ensuring that their infrastructure works, and hopefully that's going to be an opportunity for them to make those bridges stronger and better, roads, again, better, which could always be the case, and that Ukraine will look much prettier after the war. Brains, that's a more complicated matter. Of course, it touches upon informational infrastructure, communications, technology, and etc. But I will use one quote of Mikhailo Fedorov, who is the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister in charge of digital transformation, which I think encompasses a lot of important aspects. So he said, our idea is that we won't necessarily rebuild what existed before, but rather move on to the next stage. We want the whole of Ukraine to go digital. In a few years, we need to be the most digitalized country in the world. I think that's the right ambition for Ukraine and its future, not only touching upon the digital aspect, but in a more general way. And the final point is on grains, widely discussed also today. We've heard that export of grains is becoming even more expensive than at the beginning of war, and obviously prior to war. So the pre-war levels of agricultural production needs to be obviously improved for the future, because this is still going to be an important part of the Ukrainian economy. And we've heard some interesting ideas on how to tackle some of these issues. The Minister of Economy of Lithuania said that, well, Rail Baltica is supposedly needed to cover the Baltic states, Poland, and possibly Finland, to connect the European Union member states among each other. But why not to expand it broader and include Ukraine in this? Because, of course, Ukraine is certainly a part of Europe and now a candidate country. So all in all, I think all of us, whether we represent international organizations, national governments, NGOs, businesses, or are just simply volunteers, have a ways of contributing to that effort. Because after all, after every rain, we have sunshine, hopefully in Vilnius as well. Thank you very much.